I traced my finger along the seam of the stolen gown displayed on the screen, watching Elena's hand shake as she tried to explain the construction technique she'd never actually learned. The boardroom felt smaller than it should have. 12 executives, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a presentation that would unravel in exactly 43 minutes. I'd counted down every second for 6 weeks, ever since I'd handed her the rope she was now fashioning into her own noose. The emerald fabric caught the light as she advanced to the next slide, and I recognized the exact moment I'd photographed that piece. 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in my apartment, my mother's sewing machine humming in the background. Elena gestured toward the intricate beadwork circling the neckline, stumbling through an explanation of its symbolic meaning. She couldn't know what it meant. The pattern was adapted from my mother's wedding sari, each bead placed in a specific sequence that told a story Elena had never lived. The asymmetrical draping creates movement that responds to the wearer's body, Elena said, her voice gaining false confidence. It's about empowerment through fluidity. I almost smiled. In my previous life, I'd explained it to her differently. It was about transformation, about how strength doesn't always announce itself, about how the most powerful changes happen in silence. But Elena had never understood nuance. She understood theft, manipulation, and the art of wearing someone else's soul as if it were a coat she could shrug into. Jonathan Reed, the CFO, was watching me instead of the presentation. I met his gaze briefly, let nothing show on my face, then returned my attention to the screen. He'd been the only board member who'd seemed uncertain during my firing in the timeline I was erasing. This time, I'd made sure he knew exactly who I was. The designer who arrived first and left last, who never missed a deadline, whose work spoke louder than any charm offensive ever could. Elena clicked the final design, and I watched her try to explain the light reactive threading I'd spent 4 months perfecting. She called it innovative luminescent integration. The actual term was photochromic fiber manipulation, and it had required 3 failed prototypes and countless consultations with a textile scientist before I'd achieved the effect I wanted. But Eleanor wouldn't know that. She'd only seen the finished product, had only copied the result without understanding the journey. In 43 minutes, everyone in this room would understand the difference between creation and theft. I pressed my pen against my closed notebook, feeling the weight of the evidence stored on the laptop in my bag. 9 months of documentation. Time-stamped photographs, supplier emails, patent filings, video recordings, digital forensics reports, an unbreakable chain of proof that would demonstrate with clinical precision exactly how Eleanor Pierce had built her career on the corpses of other people's dreams. She'd done it to me once before. In another life, she'd taken everything and left me with nothing but accusations no one believed. This time, I'd let her think she was winning right up until the moment she lost everything. The presentation ended. Polite applause. Eleanor's smile was radiant, victorious, completely unaware that her world was already ending. She caught my eye across the room, and her expression shifted, just slightly, into something that might have been a smirk or might have been a question. I gave her nothing, no reaction, no emotion. I'd learned, in the years since my rebirth, that silence was the sharpest weapon I possessed. "Excellent work, Eleanor," Victoria Chen, the creative director, said warmly. "Your evolution as a designer continues to impress." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her voice honey-sweet. "I've been pushing myself to take more risks, to really explore the boundaries of what's possible." My risks, my boundaries, my evolution she was claiming as her own. But I said nothing. I simply waited, because in 43 minutes, now 41, my collection would show, and every single person in this room would see the identical designs and know that someone was lying. The only question would be who they believed. And unlike last time, I'd made absolutely certain there could only be one answer. The first time I lived through this year, I was 26, and still believed that talent and hard work were enough. I'd spent 7 years clawing my way up from nothing, a scholarship kid at design school, an intern who worked double shifts to afford fabric for personal projects, a junior designer who treated every assignment like it might be my last chance to prove I deserved to exist in this industry. My mother had died when I was 19, 3 weeks before I started at the Fashion Institute. Breast cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late because we couldn't afford regular checkups, and she'd ignored the symptoms until they couldn't be ignored anymore. She'd been a seamstress in a bridal shop, the kind of invisible woman who made other people's dreams come true, while her own withered from lack of sunlight and opportunity. She'd given me her sewing machine the day before she died, an old singer she'd bought used 30 years earlier, maintained with religious devotion, the machine that had fed us and clothed us and kept us alive when my father had left and the world had made it clear we were on our own. Make beautiful things, she'd whispered, her hand cold in mine. Make things that matter. Don't disappear like I did. I'd promised her, and for 7 years I'd kept that promise, working with a desperation that bordered on destruction, sacrificing everything, friendships, relationships, health, sleep, joy, to build a career that would justify her faith in me. Meridian Fashion House was my breakthrough, a prestigious firm with connections to every major buyer, and publication, the kind of place where a successful collection could launch a career into the stratosphere. I'd started as an intern, worked my way to junior designer, and by 26, I was finally trusted with meaningful projects. That was when Elena Pierce arrived. She swept into the office on a Monday in April, all honey blonde hair and effortless elegance, wearing a Chanel jacket that cost more than I made in 2 months. Her father sat on Meridian's board of directors. Her mother had been a model in the 80s. She'd studied at Parsons and interned at Dior. She was everything I wasn't, connected, confident, born into a world that had given her opportunities I'd had to steal. "You must be Maya," she said, materializing beside my desk with 2 lattes during her first week. "Victoria says you're the most talented designer here. I'd love to learn from you." I'd been so hungry for recognition that I'd believed her, so desperate for connection that I'd trusted her, so naive that I'd thought someone like Elena Pierce would genuinely want to befriend someone like me. I gave her everything. Late nights, working together, where I'd explain my design process, my inspiration, my techniques. Coffee meetings where I'd share my sketches and mood boards. Lunches where I'd talk about my mother, about growing up poor, about the dreams I carried like stones in my pockets. I'd thought we were building something real, a friendship, maybe even a sisterhood in an industry that often felt hostile to women who didn't have the right last names or the right connections. Elena absorbed everything. She asked questions that seemed genuine, offered encouragement that felt sincere, positioned herself as the mentor I'd never had. And all the while, she was planning exactly how to take what I'd built and claim it as her own. The betrayal came in September, 3 months before the annual showcase, where junior designers could finally prove themselves to the industry. I'd been developing my breakthrough collection, 13 pieces that merged traditional Indian embroidery techniques my mother had taught me with modern minimalist silhouettes. It was deeply personal, technically ambitious, stylistically unique. It was the work I'd been preparing my entire life to create. Every piece incorporated elements from my mother's saris, the ones she'd brought from India as a young bride, the ones she'd never had occasion to wear after my father left, the ones she'd carefully preserved in tissue paper and mothballs, treasures from a life she'd lost. I deconstructed the fabrics, studied the embroidery patterns, taught myself the techniques by watching YouTube videos and emailing elderly women in Mumbai who still practiced the traditional methods. The collection was called Inheritance. It was my love letter to my mother, my reclamation of a heritage I'd almost forgotten, my proof that I could honour the past while creating something entirely new. Elena stole every single piece. She presented the collection to the board under her name, claiming I'd been assisting her with technical elements, but that the creative vision was hers. She had documentation, sketches she'd backdated, photographs she'd staged, emails she'd fabricated with the help of colleagues who owed her favours or wanted to curry favour with her father. She'd built a paper trail that made her the creator, and me the assistant at best, or the thief at worst. Maya's incredibly talented, Elena had said during the emergency board meeting they'd called when I'd accused her of theft. Her voice had been gentle, sympathetic, sad. But she's still developing her creative voice. These designs required refinement and direction that came from my experience and education. I value her contributions, but she needs to understand the difference between collaboration and sole authorship. I'd screamed. I'd cried. I'd shown them my original sketches, my fabric samples, my notebooks filled with months of development and research. I'd brought in the remnants of my mother's saris, showed them how each design incorporated specific elements from specific garments. I'd explained the cultural significance, the personal meaning, the technical innovations, but Elena had been meticulous. For every piece of evidence I provided, she had a counter. For every witness who could confirm my process, she had two who supported her version. And ultimately, it came down to credibility. A senior designer from a prominent family versus a junior designer from nowhere, who'd already proven herself willing to make serious accusations. They fired me that afternoon, escorted me from the building with security watching, as if I were the criminal. Elena had stood near the elevators as I carried my box of personal items out, her expression carefully neutral, but I'd seen it, just for a second, the flash of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd won, and I'd lost everything. The next 6 months were a systematic destruction of everything I'd built. Elena's version of events spread through the industry with the speed of wildfire. I was unstable, unprofessional, delusional. I'd accused my mentor of theft out of jealousy and entitlement. I'd tried to claim credit for work that wasn't mine. I was talented but troubled, creative but unreliable, someone to avoid hiring unless you wanted drama and false accusations. I applied to 43 positions. I got 5 interviews. I got 0 offers. My savings evaporated. I moved from my decent apartment to a studio with mould in the bathroom and heating that barely functioned. I picked up freelance work designing graphics for websites, work that paid almost nothing and crushed my soul a little more each day. I stopped eating regularly because food cost money I didn't have. I stopped sleeping properly because the anxiety was a living thing in my chest, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. By March, I'd stopped leaving my apartment, except for absolute necessities. By April, I'd stopped answering my phone. By May, I'd stopped believing there was any point in continuing. The last thing I remembered from my first life was standing on my apartment balcony at 3:17 in the morning. I know because I'd checked the time, some part of me still clinging to order, even as everything else fell apart, looking down at the street 6 floors below. The pavement looked almost peaceful in the streetlight, and I'd thought about how easy it would be to step over the railing, how quiet it would finally be, how all the noise in my head would stop. I'd thought about my mother, wondered if I'd see her again, wondered if she'd be disappointed that I'd broken my promise to make beautiful things and instead had just broken. I'd climbed onto the railing, I'd looked down, I'd thought, this is it, this is how it ends, this is what Elena Pierce has made of my life. And then, Nothing. A blank. A void. A sensation like falling but not falling, like drowning but not drowning, like every atom in my body was being taken apart and reassembled in a different configuration. I opened my eyes to sunshine streaming through my bedroom window and my phone alarm playing a song I hadn't heard in 3 years. The first hour I thought I was dead and this was some kind of afterlife holding pattern. The second hour I thought I was dreaming. The third hour I started testing details. The coffee stain on my supervisor's desk that wouldn't appear until noon. The email from accounting about the summer party that would arrive at 2:37 p.m. The argument between 2 interns that would erupt around 3 o'clock over a missing fabric sample. Everything happened exactly as I remembered. By evening, I understood. I'd been given something impossible, a second chance, a reset, a do-over. I was 23 again, 3 years before Elena would join Meridian, still an intern but with the knowledge and experience of someone who'd already lived through the next 7 years. I sat on my bed in my small but decent apartment, the one I'd lose in a year when I'd downgraded to save money, and I made a decision that would define everything that came after. I would not scream this time. I would not beg or cry or defend myself in desperation. I would not trust or hope or believe in the kindness of people who smiled while planning my destruction. I would be smarter, colder, more careful. I would document everything, trust no one, and build defenses so comprehensive that no one could ever take from me again. And when Elena Pierce walked through Meridian's doors, I would let her think she was winning. I would let her steal from me again. I would hand her exactly enough rope to hang herself, and then I would watch, calm and silent and absolutely certain, as she did. I spent 3 years preparing for her arrival. 3 years transforming myself from the desperate, hopeful woman I'd been in to someone Elena Pierce couldn't touch. The other interns saw me as driven but distant, professional to the point of cold. I stopped sharing my process. I stopped eating lunch in the common area, stopped attending happy hours, stopped trying to make friends. People thought I was strange, antisocial, maybe even arrogant. Let them. Friendship had nearly destroyed me once. This time I chose solitude and power. I documented everything obsessively. Every sketch got photographed with newspapers, displaying current dates visible in the frame. Every fabric order got saved in triplicate, email confirmations, physical receipts, and screenshots backed up to 3 separate cloud services. I started filming myself working, hours of footage showing the development of each design from initial concept to finished piece, all time-stamped and verified. I took online courses in patent law and intellectual property protection. I learned exactly how to file provisional patents, how to establish prior art, how to create unbreakable chains of evidence for creative ownership. I hired a lawyer I could barely afford, a woman named Patricia Vance who specialised in fashion industry disputes and who'd seen enough theft cases to understand exactly what I was preparing for. "You're building a fortress," Patricia had said during one of our early consultations, reviewing my documentation systems. "Yes," I'd replied simply. "Good. Most designers don't think about protection until after they've been burned." I didn't tell her I'd already been burned. I just paid her retainer and continued building walls around everything I created. I studied the board members, learning their patterns and preferences, their public statements and private prejudices. I paid special attention to Jonathan Reed, the CFO who'd seemed uncertain during my firing in the previous timeline. I researched his background and discovered he'd built his career on ethical business practices, had publicly criticised intellectual property theft in the tech industry, had written editorial pieces about corporate responsibility and integrity. I made sure he noticed me, not through charm or manipulation, but through consistent, excellent work. I never missed a deadline. I never delivered anything less than my best. I never engaged in office politics or gossip. I became known as the designer who was always working, always improving, always reliable. By the time I made junior designer at 24, a year earlier than in my previous life, I'd created a reputation as someone serious, talented, and slightly intimidating. People respected me but didn't particularly like me. Perfect. I didn't need to be liked. I needed to be believed when it mattered. I continued taking on freelance projects outside of Meridian, building my own client base and industry relationships. I cultivated connections with fabric suppliers and manufacturers, people who could verify my work and timelines independently of anything Elena might eventually fabricate. I gave talks at design schools about protecting intellectual property. I published articles in industry journals about ethical practices and creative ownership. I built myself into someone credible, documented, untouchable. And all the while, I waited for Elena Pierce to arrive so I could destroy her the way she'd destroyed me. She walked through Meridian's doors on a Monday in April, exactly as I remembered. Same honey blonde hair, same designer clothes, same warm smile that had once made me feel seen and valued. She moved through the office like she owned it, greeting people with easy confidence, laughing at jokes, making instant connections with a charm I'd once envied, and now recognized as a predator's camouflage. "You must be Maya," she said, approaching my desk during her first week with 2 lattes. "I've heard wonderful things about your work. Victoria says you're someone I should definitely get to know." I looked up from my sketches, accepted the coffee with a polite nod and said, "Thank you. Welcome to Meridian." She waited for more. An invitation to sit, questions about her background, enthusiasm about potential collaboration. I gave her nothing. After a moment of awkward silence, she smiled again, a little less certain. "Well, I look forward to working with you," she said. "Likewise," I replied, already returning my attention to my work. She stood there for another few seconds, clearly expecting more engagement, then walked away. I felt her confusion like a physical presence, the first crack in her confidence. She wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone she'd already categorized as beneath her. Over the next few weeks, she tried repeatedly to befriend me. Coffee invitations I declined. Lunch suggestions I politely refused. Questions about my design process I deflected with minimal information. Compliments I acknowledged without returning. Every overture met with professional courtesy and absolute emotional distance. I watched her frustration grow. In the previous timeline, I'd been so grateful for her attention, so eager for connection, that I'd made myself vulnerable immediately. This time, I was a locked door, and she couldn't figure out how to pick the lock. She changed tactics. If she couldn't befriend me directly, she'd befriend everyone around me. She started bringing in pastries for the team, organising after-work drinks, remembering birthdays, creating an inner circle that deliberately excluded me. She became the office favourite. Fun, generous, warm, everything I wasn't. It should have hurt. In another life, it had destroyed me, made me feel isolated and unwanted, pushed me toward her as the only person offering friendship. This time, I barely noticed. I was too busy preparing for the showcase. The annual showcase was Meridian's signature event, a presentation of new collections to buyers, press, and industry leaders that could make or break careers. Junior designers were allowed to submit one collection for consideration, and, if selected, they'd show alongside senior designers and established names. It was the opportunity I'd been working toward in my previous life, the moment Elena had stolen from me. This time, I would submit 2 collections. Elena would only know about one of them. The first collection I developed openly, making sure everyone could see it. I left sketches on my desk, discussed ideas in team meetings, brought fabric samples to the office. It was good work, genuinely good, but safe. Contemporary pieces with commercial appeal, the kind of designs expected from an ambitious junior designer who understood the market. I made sure Elena saw every detail. I wanted her familiar with every piece, comfortable with every design, confident that she knew exactly what I was planning. The second collection, I told no one. I worked on it at night in my apartment. Curtains drawn, phone silenced, door locked. 15 pieces that pushed every boundary I understood about construction and form. The theme was metamorphosis. Garments that appeared simple at first glance, but revealed hidden complexity in movement and light, structures that transformed based on how they were worn, fabrics that responded to temperature and touch. I used experimental materials I'd sourced through private contacts, photochromic threading that changed colour based on light exposure, shape memory fabrics that could be programmed to shift silhouettes, hidden magnetic closures that allowed garments to reconfigure in multiple ways. I incorporated techniques I'd learned from my mother and refined in my previous lifetime, combined with innovations I discovered through obsessive research and countless failed experiments. Every piece was documented from conception to completion. I filmed myself sketching initial designs with current newspapers visible in the frame. I recorded the entire construction process, hours of footage showing every technical decision and creative choice. I saved every receipt, every fabric order, every email exchange with suppliers. Patricia reviewed and filed provisional patents on 3 key construction techniques that were genuinely novel. I built an unbreakable chain of evidence that these designs were mine, and mine alone, created over 9 months of documented work. The safe collection, the one everyone knew about, I never entered in the showcase at all. I submitted my Metamorphosis collection at the last possible moment, dropping the entry at the showcase office at 4:57 p.m. on the deadline day. The administrator looked surprised. She'd been expecting my commercial collection, the one I'd been publicly developing for months. Last-minute change, she asked. Creative evolution, I replied with a small smile. Elena's reaction was immediate. She caught me in the parking garage as I was leaving, her expression tight with barely controlled frustration. "Maya," she said, her voice sharp, "I thought you were submitting the Urban Contemporary series. What happened?" "Change of plans," I said simply. "Can I see what you submitted?" "The board will see it at the selection review next week." Her eyes hardened. "We're supposed to support each other as designers. I've been trying to build a relationship with you for months, and you shut me out at every turn. Why don't you trust me?" I met her gaze steadily, letting a beat of silence stretch between us. "I don't mix friendship with business. Nothing personal." It was entirely personal. It was the most personal thing I'd ever done. But she would never know that until it was too late. "Fine," she said coldly. "Good luck with the selection." "You too," I replied, knowing exactly what she'd submit. Elena submitted her showcase collection the next day, and I recognised every single piece. They were my designs from the commercial collection I'd abandoned. The one I deliberately left visible, deliberately made available, deliberately designed to be stolen. She'd photographed my discarded sketches, my sample fabrics, my mood boards. She'd recreated my work down to the smallest detail, probably thinking I'd submitted something else, and would never know she'd copied the collection I'd been publicly developing for months. In the previous timeline, this had destroyed me. Elena presenting my work as her own while I had nothing to show. This time, it was exactly what I'd planned. She'd stolen the decoy, the bait, the trap I'd laid 9 months earlier. The board selection review was held on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 collections would be chosen for the showcase. 1 from senior designers, 1 from mid-level designers, and 1 from junior designers. Elena's stolen work competed in the senior category. My Metamorphosis collection competed in the junior category. Both collections were selected. When the announcement came, Elena's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally a forced smile. She'd expected her stolen work to shine while I had nothing to show. Instead, I'd submitted something she'd never seen, never had a chance to copy, something that had earned selection on its own merit. "Congratulations," she said to me after the announcement, her voice ice cold. "I look forward to seeing what you've been hiding." "Thank you," I replied warmly. "Your collection looks wonderful too." I recognised some of the pieces from the work I'd left on my desk. "It's flattering that you found my abandoned designs worth pursuing." Her face froze, just for a second, but I saw it. The flash of panic, the realisation that I knew exactly what she'd done. Then her mask returned. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "Of course not," I replied with a gentle smile. "Must be a coincidence. There are only so many ways to interpret contemporary urban design, after all." I walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the hallway with the first seeds of doubt taking root. For the next 6 weeks, Elena tried to see my collection. She volunteered to help with showcase preparation, hoping to gain access to the storage area where collections were kept. She befriended the showcase coordinator, fishing for information. She even tried to hack into my computer one night when I'd left it briefly unattended in the office, an attempt I knew about because I'd installed monitoring software specifically to catch that kind of intrusion. But she couldn't see the pieces. I'd stored them off-site at Patricia's office, and the only people who knew the full collection were me, my lawyer, and the board members who'd reviewed the submission. I watched her grow desperate, and I did nothing. Just continued working, continued being professional and distant, continued giving her no openings. Then, 6 weeks before the showcase, I gave her exactly what she wanted. I approached her in the parking garage on a Tuesday evening, making sure I looked uncertain, almost nervous, a glimpse of the vulnerable woman I'd been in my previous life. "Elena," I said quietly, "can we talk?" She turned from loading shopping bags into her Mercedes, surprise flickering across her face. "Of course, is everything all right?" "I need advice." I let my voice shake slightly. "The board loved my collection in the review, but now I'm terrified. What if it's not commercial enough? What if buyers don't understand the concepts? What if I've been too experimental?" I watched something light up in her eyes. Predatory interest, barely concealed satisfaction. This was the Maya she recognised, the insecure designer who needed guidance and validation. "I'm sure your work is wonderful," she said, her voice instantly warm and reassuring. "Would you look at it?" I met her gaze with perfectly calculated vulnerability. "You have so much more experience than I do, and I know I've been distant, but I'm scared I'm going to fail. I don't have anyone else to ask." This was the Elena I remembered, the one who fed on insecurity and positioned herself as saviour. She couldn't resist. "Of course I'll help," she said immediately. "Why don't you bring everything by my apartment this weekend? We can go through it together and I'll give you my honest feedback." "Thank you," I said, letting relief flood my voice. "This means everything." I showed her the entire Metamorphosis collection, every sketch, every fabric sample, every construction detail, every styling concept. I brought my laptop and walked her through my inspiration, my technical innovations, my vision for how each piece would show on the runway. I answered every question she asked. I explained things she didn't understand. I even demonstrated some of the transformative features, the magnetic closures, the photochromic threading, the shape memory fabrics. I made myself completely vulnerable, just like I had in my previous life. When I left 3 hours later, I, accidentally, left my external hard drive on her coffee table. I called her an hour later in pretend panic. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I think I left my hard drive at your place. All my files are on it. Don't worry, she said soothingly. I'll bring it to the office tomorrow morning. Your work is completely safe with me. I knew she was copying everything that night. The hard drive had tracking software installed that logged every file, access, every copy attempt, every timestamp. Patricia received real-time notifications of each action. Elena spent 4 hours copying every file, examining every detail, probably already planning how to claim the designs as her own. 3 days later, Elena withdrew her collection from the showcase, claiming she needed to take her work in a new direction and wanted more time to refine her vision. The board was surprised but accommodating. She was a senior designer with connections, and the showcase could proceed with 2 collections instead of 3 if necessary. 2 weeks after that, she submitted a new collection for emergency review, asking the board to consider including it in the showcase, despite the unusual timing. It was my metamorphosis line. Every piece, every detail, every technical innovation I'd spent 9 months creating, stolen again just like before. The board, impressed by her apparent creative breakthrough and not wanting to disappoint the daughter of a board member, approved her new collection immediately. She would show in the showcase after all. We would both be presenting Elena's stolen version of my work and my original pieces. Identical collections, same designs, same techniques, same vision. The only question would be who created them first. And unlike last time, I had an answer that couldn't be disputed. The showcase was held at the Grandview Hotel, a converted ballroom filled with 300 industry professionals. Buyers, press, boutique owners, stylists, influencers, anyone who mattered in fashion was there. The energy was electric, everyone dressed in deliberate statements, champagne flowing, conversations layered with professional assessment and personal ambition. Elena's collection would show first, in the prime evening slot. Mine would show second, in the later evening. She'd insisted on going first, probably wanting to establish herself as the original before anyone saw my identical pieces. The board had agreed, giving preference to the senior designer. I sat in the audience for her presentation, wearing a simple black dress that drew no attention, my expression neutral and calm. The lights dimmed. Music started, something electronic and ethereal, the same soundtrack I'd planned for my own showing. The first model appeared, and the audience leaned forward with interest. The emerald wrap dress moved down the runway, and I watched people react to the origami pleated structure that revealed itself with each step. The ivory coat that transformed into an evening gown through hidden magnetic closures. The black bodysuit with photochromic threading that created constellation patterns under the stage lights. Piece after piece, my work presented as hers, my vision explained by someone who didn't understand the meaning behind any of it. Elena stood beside the runway with confident pride, smiling at cameras, accepting congratulations from people who stopped to speak with her. She looked radiant, victorious, completely certain that she'd won again. The audience responded well. People took notes, took photos, exchanged interested glances. Several buyers approached Elena between pieces, already discussing potential orders. I watched the same scene I'd witnessed in nightmares for years, Elena claiming credit for my work while I sat powerless and unknown. Except this time, I wasn't powerless. And in less than an hour, everyone would know it. The presentation ended to strong applause. Elena took a small bow, beaming with genuine happiness. This was her moment of triumph, the validation she'd stolen from me once before. I remained seated, perfectly still, waiting. My collection showed 40 minutes later. The instant the first model appeared, wearing the identical emerald wrap dress Elena had just presented, confusion rippled through the audience like a wave. Whispers started immediately, heads turning, people pulling out their phones to compare photos. By the third piece, when it became undeniable that both collections were identical, the room erupted in urgent conversation. Buyers and press representatives clustered together, comparing notes. Board members stood from their seats, expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Showcase coordinators rushed toward the backstage area, probably trying to figure out if there'd been some kind of administrative error. Elena's face drained of all colour. She pushed through the crowd toward the board members, already talking, already explaining, her voice rising above the general chaos. I could see her gesturing, her practiced charm deployed in desperate overdrive. I stayed in my seat, hands folded in my lap, expression calm. Jonathan Reed found me before the presentation finished. "Maya, we need to talk. Now." "Of course," I said quietly. He led me toward the hotel's conference area, and I followed without resistance. Behind us, I heard Elena's voice, high and urgent, insisting there had been a terrible mistake. They convened an emergency meeting in one of the hotel's private conference rooms. The full board, Elena, me, Patricia, who I'd asked to attend, and 2 members of hotel security as neutral witnesses. The energy in the room was tense, electric with accusation and confusion. Victoria Chen, the creative director, spoke first. "Someone needs to explain what just happened. We just showed 2 identical collections. That's not a coincidence." Elena spoke before I could, her voice steady but urgent. "I can explain. Maya came to me weeks ago asking for help with her collection. I mentored her, gave her feedback, tried to guide her creative development. I had no idea she was planning to copy my designs." "That's absurd," I said calmly. "Why would I steal work from a collection scheduled to show before mine? Everyone would immediately know." "You were desperate," Elena shot back, her composure cracking slightly. "You've been struggling for years to make your mark, and you saw an opportunity. You thought if you submitted my designs as your own, people would assume I was the copycat since my collection showed first. It's actually quite clever, in a manipulative sort of way." Several board members frowned, considering this logic. "Then how did I create identical pieces?" I asked, my voice remaining even and calm. "These garments take months to construct, use experimental materials that require custom ordering and extensive testing. When would I have seen your designs in time to recreate them perfectly?" "You broke into my workspace," Elena said without hesitation, "or you hacked my computer. I don't know exactly how, but you found a way to access my files and steal my work." She was good. She'd clearly prepared for this confrontation, had her story ready, her explanations polished. In another timeline, this might have worked. She had the credibility, the connections, the assumed trustworthiness that came from her name and position. But this time, I had something she didn't. The truth, backed by documentation that couldn't be disputed. "I can prove the collection is mine," I said simply. Eleanor's expression flickered, just for a second, the briefest flash of panic, before her confident mask returned. "So can I." Jonathan Reed leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then, let's see. Both of you. Show us your evidence. We'll review everything and make a determination." Elena presented first. She'd clearly spent significant time preparing her fabricated timeline. She had sketches dated 3 months earlier, printed on high-quality paper with professional formatting. She had photographs of fabric samples arranged in her home studio. She had text message exchanges with suppliers discussing materials and delivery schedules. She had a junior designer, Marcus Chen, someone who'd been obviously infatuated with her since she arrived, prepared to testify that he'd seen her working on the pieces in her private workspace. It was impressive, thorough, exactly the kind of documentation that had destroyed me in my previous life. She'd learned from whatever con she'd run before, had gotten better at creating false evidence, at building paper trails that looked legitimate. As you can see, Elena concluded, her voice strong and confident, I've been developing this collection since January. Every piece is documented from conception to final construction. I have consistent documentation, witness testimony, and a clear, creative timeline. Jonathan turned to me. Maya? I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room display. May I? For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through a timeline that demolished Elena's story, piece by piece. I started with my original sketches for the Metamorphosis collection, created 9 months earlier. Time-stamped photographs showing me drawing each design with dated newspapers clearly visible in the frame. Not 3 months ago, like Elena claimed. 9 months ago, when she hadn't even joined Meridian yet. I showed fabric orders placed 7 months before Elena's supposed start date. Emails with textile suppliers discussing the custom photochromic threading I'd requested, shipping confirmations for shape memory fabrics that had arrived at my apartment 6 months ago. Then I showed them the commercial collection. The safe, contemporary designs I'd deliberately left visible in the office. These are the pieces I discussed openly in team meetings, I explained calmly. The ones I left on my desk, the ones I talked about with colleagues. Elena submitted these exact designs under her name 2 months ago for the showcase, before withdrawing them. I pulled up Elena's withdrawn collection file from the showcase office. The designs matched my abandoned commercial series perfectly. Same silhouettes, same fabric choices, same construction details. She'd already stolen one collection from me, I continued, my voice even. So, when I developed the Metamorphosis line, I told no one. I worked on it privately, documented everything meticulously, and submitted at the last possible moment to prevent theft. Then, how did Elena access your designs? Victoria asked, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding. I showed them the security footage I'd recorded in Elena's apartment, me explaining the collection, walking her through each piece, demonstrating the technical innovations. The timestamp was clear, 6 weeks earlier. Elena had invited me over, positioned herself as a mentor offering help to an insecure designer. I showed them to her myself, I said quietly. She asked to see my work, said she wanted to give me advice. I trusted her. Elena's hands clenched on the table. You're lying. You're editing timestamps, fabricating evidence to destroy me. I'm not finished. I pulled up the access logs from the external hard drive I'd intentionally left at her apartment. Every file she'd copied, every timestamp, every action, all recorded in real time and sent to my lawyer. She copied every file that night. Patricia has the complete digital forensics report, verified by an independent cybersecurity firm. I showed them the provisional patent filings for 3 construction techniques used in the collection, filed 4 months earlier, listing me as sole inventor. I showed them video recordings of me creating the pieces in my apartment, each video time-stamped and verified by metadata analysis. Hours of footage showing my hand stitching, draping, problem-solving. Finally, I showed them the deliberate flaws I'd included in the commercial collection she'd stolen for her first submission. Incorrect measurements in 3 pieces, incompatible fabric choices that would cause structural failure, design elements that looked beautiful but were actually unwearable. If these were truly Elena's original designs, I said, why would she include technical errors that make the garments fall apart after one wearing? She wouldn't. But if she was copying without understanding the construction principles, she'd reproduce the mistakes without realizing they were intentional sabotage. The silence in the room was absolute. Jonathan Reed looked at Elena, his expression carved from stone. Did you copy Maya's designs? She manipulated everything, Elena started, but her voice had lost all certainty. The metadata doesn't lie, Jonathan interrupted. Neither do patent filings, supplier records, or security footage. Maya has a documented timeline going back 9 months. You have fabricated evidence dated 3 months ago. My father is on the board, Elena said desperately. You can't. Your father will be asked to recuse himself from this decision, Victoria said coldly. This is about integrity, not connections. Eleanor Pierce was terminated the following morning. The board issued a public statement about zero tolerance for intellectual property theft. Her father resigned a week later. The Metamorphosis collection debuted at a private showing for buyers who'd witnessed the disaster. Orders exceeded all projections. Fashion Week cooled. Major retailers competed for exclusive pieces. I was promoted to senior designer within months. 5 years later, I stood in my own studio with my name on the door and a team of designers who trusted me because I'd never taken credit for anyone else's work. I'd built everything twice. Once in a life that was stolen from me, and once in a life I'd protected with walls of documentation and strategic silence. Sometimes young designers ask me for advice, and I tell them the same thing. Document everything. Trust carefully. Protect your work like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. I keep Eleanor's final letter in my desk drawer, the one where she called me cold and calculating, where she accused me of destroying her deliberately. She was right. I had calculated every move. I had handed her the rope and watched her hang herself with it. But I hadn't destroyed her. She destroyed herself the moment she chose theft over creation. My victory was never about revenge. It was about becoming someone she could never touch again. I didn't destroy Eleanor Pierce. I simply refused to disappear the way my mother had. I refused to let someone else wear my soul like a borrowed coat. I outgrew the version of myself that could be victimized and became someone untouchable. And that, more than any confrontation or exposure, was the truest measure of my freedom.